There is a 10-minute and 53-second sequence in a 1968 film that changed what car culture thought was possible on a movie screen. No orchestral score, no cutaway reactions, no slow motion. Just a Highland Green Fastback, the streets of San Francisco, and a driver who was not pretending. And then, when the camera stopped rolling, the most famous muscle car in Hollywood history drove off into the kind of silence that takes 50 years to break. Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle, the film, the chase, the legend. Let's establish what Bullitt actually was, because a lot of people know the chase and not the film, and the film context matters for understanding what the car was asked to do. 1968. Steve McQueen is arguably the biggest movie star on the planet. Not the most awarded, not the most critically celebrated, but the most watched, the most wanted, the most copied. He had come off The Great Escape, The Cincinnati Kid, The Thomas Crown Affair. He understood something about screen presence that most actors never figure out, which is that stillness reads louder than movement when you've built the right tension around it. He formed his own production company, Solar Productions, specifically so he could control what he made and how he made it. Bullitt was a Solar production. McQueen chose the material, chose the director, chose the location, and, critically, chose to do the majority of his own driving. The film itself is a police procedural, a corrupt politician, a witness, a conspiracy, a detective named Frank Bullitt, who operates slightly outside the rules in ways that feel earned rather than reckless. Peter Yates directed it with a documentary restraint that was genuinely unusual for Hollywood at the time. But none of that is why 55 years later, people are still watching it. They're watching it for the chase. The sequence runs 10 minutes and 53 seconds. A Highland Green 1968 Ford Mustang GT 390 Fastback versus a black Dodge Charger RT through the streets of San Francisco. What Yates and McQueen understood was that the audience needed to feel the physics, not see the physics described by a camera that floated above the action and made everything look safe. Feel it. The camera went inside the car. The engine noise was kept real. The cars actually moved at speeds that made the stunt team genuinely nervous. Stunt driver Bud Ekins handled the most extreme moments, but McQueen drove far more than studios typically allowed their stars to do, and it shows. The man had raced competitively. He knew car control. That knowledge reads on screen in ways that are impossible to fake, and audiences felt it even if they couldn't have articulated why. The Charger became airborne. The Mustang caught air off the crests of those San Francisco hills so many times that the car's suspension was being rebuilt between shooting days. The hubcaps that go flying in the sequence, those were not planned. Those were real hubcaps departing a car that was being driven at actual speed over actual pavement. The production kept them in because they looked exactly like what they were, unscripted proof that something real was happening. The two Mustangs now, the cars themselves. Warner Brothers and the production sourced two 1968 Ford Mustang GT Fastbacks for filming. Both were painted in a Ford color called Highland Green, a dark, almost brooding shade that photographs differently in every light condition, which, if you've ever wondered why the car looks slightly different between scenes, is your answer. Same reason the Cobra Mercury in the Stallone film looked gray in one scene and nearly black in the next. Paint that does something interesting under film light is not an accident. These people knew what they were doing. Car number 1 was designated the hero car. Close-ups, interior work, any sequence where the camera needed to actually live with the machine. Car number 2 was the stunt car, built for the sequences that would abuse it, and abuse it they did. The stunt car's fate is the easier story to tell because it ends quickly and badly. After production wrapped, the stunt Mustang was assessed for damage and found to be in a condition that made restoration economically pointless. The front end had taken serious impact. The chassis had issues. The decision was made to scrap it, and it was crushed. Gone, confirmed. There is no mystery there, no barn find waiting to happen, no private collector sitting on a secret. That car is iron oxide somewhere in the California soil and has been since approximately 1969. The hero car is a different story entirely. The hero car is the reason we're here. The hero car goes dark. When filming on Bullitt wrapped in 1968, the Hero Mustang did not go to a museum. It did not go back to Ford. It did not end up in a celebrity collection or a studio archive. It got sold. And here is where the story takes the kind of turn that you genuinely could not write as fiction, because no one would believe it. The car that had just starred in the most celebrated chase sequence in the history of American cinema was purchased by a private citizen named Robert Kiernan from North Berwick, Maine, for a price that, depending on who you ask and which documentation you trust, sat somewhere in the range of $3,500 to $6,000. Robert Kiernan was not a collector. He was not a film-obsessive hunting down production vehicles. He bought a used car. A nice used car, a fast used car, but a used car. And then he drove it. Not stored it, not trailered it to shows. Drove it. As his daily driver, in Maine, through winters. Let that image settle for a moment. The Bullitt Mustang, in the snow, in New England, being used as basic transportation by a man who presumably just needed to get to work. I love this detail so much it almost hurts. There is something deeply, specifically American about it. The most famous chase car on the planet, running grocery store errands in the northeastern winter. No velvet rope, no climate control, just a man and his car. The Kiernan family kept the car for decades. Robert passed it along to his son, Sean, and the car stayed in the family, sitting, aging, accumulating the particular kind of character that comes from actual use rather than careful preservation. The paint wore. The interior showed its age. The mechanical condition reflected a car that had been driven hard in a film production and then driven regularly for years afterward, because that is exactly what it was. McQueen tried to buy it back. Here is where the story picks up a detail that most people know in outline, but not in full, and it is one of the best details in all of movie car history. Steve McQueen knew where the car was. At some point after filming wrapped, McQueen tracked down Robert Kiernan and made an offer to buy the Mustang back. McQueen wanted it. Of course he wanted it. The man had driven it, had built a film around it, had made it part of his identity. The car was an extension of the McQueen mythology in a way that very few objects in his life were. He collected cars voraciously, motorcycles too, but this one had a specific gravity. He wanted it back. Robert Kiernan said no. I want to be precise here because the phrasing matters. This was not a hostile negotiation. It was not a legal dispute. It was not a dramatic confrontation. By all accounts, it was a polite exchange in which McQueen made his interest clear, and Kiernan, equally politely, declined to sell. The car was not for sale, not to anyone, not even to the man who had made it famous. Think about the particular kind of character it takes to look Steve McQueen in the face, in the absolute peak of his cultural power. The most famous man on the planet, who also happens to be the reason your car is worth anything, and say, "No thank you, I'm keeping it." Robert Kiernan had that character. And in the years since, the automotive world has decided he was right to hold the line, because the story that car ended up telling, by staying exactly where it was, in one family, unrestored, unshowboated, undisturbed, turned out to be the best possible story it could have told. McQueen passed away in November of 1980 from pleural mesothelioma. He never got the car back. The Mustang stayed in Maine. 50 years of silence. After McQueen died, the trail on the hero Bullitt Mustang went genuinely cold. Not sort of cold. Not, we have a few leads but nothing confirmed cold. Cold, cold. The kind of cold where the collector car community, which is not a community known for leaving stones unturned, spent the better part of 3 decades operating on rumors, forum posts, and hope. The car became a kind of automotive mythology. People claimed to have seen it. People claimed to know people who had seen it. There were alleged sightings in New England. There was a version of the story where it had been repainted. There was a version where it had been sold again and changed hands multiple times. None of it was verified. None of it checked out. The Mustang collector community in particular spent years trying to cross-reference VIN numbers, track title transfers, and follow any paper trail that might lead somewhere solid. The VIN on the hero car is 2R02S125559, and if you spent any time in Mustang forums between 1990 and 2010, you have almost certainly seen that number written in a context that involved the word unconfirmed. The car was real. Everyone knew it was real. But for 50 years, real and findable turned out to be 2 very different things. The irony, and it is a considerable irony, is that the car was not hidden. It was not in a secure facility. It was not behind a locked gate on a private estate. It was in a family that simply had no particular interest in announcing themselves to the collector car world. The Kiernans were not guarding a secret. They were just living their lives. The car happened to be there, and because no one was looking for attention, no one found them. Sometimes the most effective place to hide something is in plain sight, inside a completely ordinary life that has no reason to make noise. I think about this sometimes, and it genuinely gets me. A $500,000 piece of cinematic history sitting in a family's possession while the entire collector world spun its wheels, literally and figuratively. Okay, I'll see myself out on that one. The barn find of the century. And then, in January of 2019, Sean Kiernan walked into the North American International Auto Show in Detroit and changed everything. Ford was celebrating the launch of the new Bullitt Mustang, a special edition package that had been revived multiple times over the decades as a tribute to the original. It was a marketing moment, a nostalgia play, the kind of brand activation that automakers do when they want to remind the world that their heritage runs deep. Ford had done the same thing in 2001 and 2008 with previous Bullitt editions. Nothing unusual there. What was unusual was the car parked in the Ford display that nobody from the press had seen before that morning. Highland green, aged paint, original interior showing 50 years of genuine use, no Trailer Queen shine, no fresh restoration. A car that looked exactly like what it was, a machine that had been driven and driven some more, and kept some more for nearly 5 decades by a family in Maine who just really liked it. Sean Kiernan had brought it out. Ford had coordinated the reveal. And for about 48 hours, the automotive internet ceased to function in any meaningful way, because every single person who cared about cars was trying to process what they were looking at. The condition of the car was, to put it plainly, extraordinary in its very ordinariness. The paint had faded and worn to a patina that no restoration shop could replicate on purpose. The interior showed its age honestly. The mechanicals had been maintained but not hot-rodded, not upgraded, not fussed over beyond what was needed to keep it running. This was not a car that had been preserved behind glass. This was a car that had been lived with. And that specific quality, the proof of a real life actually lived, made it more valuable, not less. Sean Kiernan gave interviews. He talked about growing up with the car. He talked about what it meant to his father. He talked about the letters and offers that had come in over the years, the collectors and speculators who had somehow tracked them down and knocked on the door. He said the family had considered selling it at various points. They had always decided not to, not for any grand principled reason, but because it was their car and they wanted to keep it. That is an honest and genuinely moving answer, and I respect it completely. The world had 1 year to look at the car before the Kiernans made the decision that Sean described as the right time. In January of 2020, the Hero Bullitt Mustang crossed an auction block for the first time in its life. Lee Mann's May Come and the auction May Come auctions. Kissimmee, Florida, January of 2020. Lot S138. If you want a single image that captures how the collector car world felt about this moment, picture a bidding floor that went so quiet when the car rolled in that you could hear the air conditioning. The press coverage alone would have embarrassed most Barrett-Jackson headline lots. Here's the number, $3,400,000. Final price with fees, $3,740,000. Let me put that in context, because the number deserves it. A standard 1968 Mustang GT Fastback in excellent, documented, numbers-matching condition brings somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 on a strong auction night. Push the provenance, add some history, maybe you crack $100,000. Maybe. The Bullitt Mustang sold for roughly 35 times that ceiling. 35 times. Not because someone restored it, not because it has a racing history or a factory special orders build sheet that separates it from the production line, because of a 10-minute and 53-second chase sequence and a family in Maine who just kept the thing. That is what story does to value when the documentation is airtight and the car is genuinely, verifiably real. Now, to be fair, and I believe in being fair even when the dramatic version is more satisfying, that is not the most expensive Mustang ever sold. Certain Shelby GT 350 competition cars have cleared higher in private sales. A 1967 Shelby GT 500 has crossed $2 million on a good night, but those cars have racing pedigree, factory separation from standard production, documented competition history. The Bullitt car is a factory-spec Mustang GT. Nothing on the build sheet separates it from thousands of other 1968 fastbacks, except where it went and who drove it. $3.7 million for that Delta is the collector market telling you exactly how it prices a perfect, unbroken 50-year provenance chain attached to the right cultural moment. Honestly, the market got it right. I'll die on that hill. The buyer's identity was not disclosed at the time of sale, which in auction terms is completely standard for a transaction at that level. What was disclosed were the conditions the Kiernan family attached to the sale. The car had to remain accessible. It could not disappear behind a locked gate or into a climate-controlled private room that nobody ever sees. Sean Kiernan was explicit about it. They had kept the car for 50 years, and they were not handing it to someone who was going to bury it. That condition shaped where the car ended up. And where it ended up, as we are about to get into, is exactly right. Where it lives now. And here is where the story lands in a place that feels genuinely right. The car was subsequently acquired by the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, in partnership with the buyer. It is now part of the museum's permanent collection, displayed alongside other landmarks of American automotive and cultural history, which, if you think about it, is exactly where it belongs. Not a studio archive, not a celebrity collection, not a private garage with a dehumidifier and a security camera. A public museum in Michigan, in the state where the car was built, where anyone who makes the drive can stand next to it and understand that this is not a replica, not a restoration, not a tribute. This is the actual car. The Henry Ford Museum's collection already includes the presidential limousine from Dallas in 1963, the Rosa Parks bus, the chair from Ford's theater. They know how to hold objects that carry historical weight. The Bullitt Mustang is in good company, and it is in good hands. The paint is still faded. The interior still shows its age. Nobody has touched it up or freshened it, or made it look like something it isn't. It sits exactly as it arrived, which is exactly as it should be. The patina is not a flaw. The patina is the whole story. Here is what I keep coming back to when I think about this story, and it is something the other famous movie car tales do not quite have in the same way. The Bullitt Mustang survived because a family in Maine simply decided it was theirs and acted accordingly. No grand mission, no preservation crusade, no awareness that they were sitting on a cultural artifact that half the world was looking for. Robert Kiernan bought a used car, said no to Steve McQueen, drove it in the snow, and passed it to his son. Sean Kiernan grew up with it, kept it, and eventually decided the right moment had come to let it be seen. That chain of ordinary decisions produced an extraordinary outcome. The car came out of 50 years of silence in better shape, with a better story, and with a more direct line to the original production than if it had been bought by a collector in 1970 and professionally restored in 1985 and traded through auction houses ever since. The Kiernan family did not know they were preserving film history. They were just keeping a car they liked. And that accidental preservation turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to it. The stunt car is gone. The Charger that chased it through San Francisco is gone. Peter Yates is gone. McQueen is gone. What remains is a faded Highland Green Fastback in Dearborn, Michigan, wearing 50 years of honest use on its skin, and a story that required half a century of silence to fully tell itself.